one of the topics that's kind of near and dear to my heart that I've been wanting to try to put together is a presentation as well as a workshop on interview. And I know that a lot of you guys are excited to embark on the next journey, and so this is my survivor guide to navigate the elements. And hopefully by the very end you'll live to tell the story. So let's get started. So what's the big deal with interviews anyways? I'd like to, and by the way, this doesn't apply just to medical students. I think this applies to residents and attending. So what my families think I do, what my family thinks I do, what my patients think I do, what society thinks I do, what I think I do. So this applies to everything, so not just med students. As we talk initially about the timeline, the key when you're setting up all of your interviews is balance. I'll kind of go through this a little bit later, as well as control what you can control as far as, I think you guys are very keen in terms of trying to be smart in terms of what rotations you're going to be setting up during your interview season. Obviously, you don't want to set something up that's going to be so rigorous that you're not going to pry your eyeballs open. There's the cord letter or the standard letter evaluation. Whom should you get these from? And make it easy for your letter writers to give timelines and follow up. I won't really go too much into detail about the cord letter or standard letter of evaluation unless you guys want me to go into it. As far as scheduling goes, just be smart about scheduling. I think the main thing is have a realistic approach. Depending on where you guys are looking to interview, there are some that will stay local. There are others that are not restricted by any sort of travel. Just realize that weather permitting, there's going to be delays traveling across country. So just keep that in mind as you start to do all that stuff. Be careful to not overcommit also. There are invariably going to be some times where you're going to get dates, and it would be perfect if they could line up geographically or if they could line up on different dates, and sometimes you're going to be stuck with making that tough decision where some of the dates are going to conflict. What I would tell you is that I would not double book yourself, and I would definitely give the benefit of the doubt to the programs. If you intend on not going to that interview, I would definitely let them know it's the right thing to do. And as far as scheduling your interviews, it seems pretty common knowledge to try to set up your more desirable interviews somewhere in the middle, not right in the very get-go, not your first interview by the very degree, so that you get a little bit of practice and you get the nerves underneath yourself. So preparation, if there's ever a slide that I want to spend a lot of time on, it's really this. I think in terms of us going through the process and seeing what it's like, there's a book that you guys have to read, and you can summarize it within the first 3.5 years are really going to be boiled down to that one day that you're going to interview, because on that day you're on the same level playing field as everybody else that's there. So whether that's someone that's at a higher level of caliber of schooling and vice versa, you guys are all on the same level. So keep that in mind as you're kind of going through. Make sure that you assess the program's strengths and weaknesses, and then find out what your own priorities are, and does the program meet your priorities and career goals. You're going to be nervous. I think it's definitely definitely one of those things where I don't think anybody is perfectly set to, especially in the first interview, to nail it exactly the way that they want to, but the more practice that you guys get, the easier it is to kind of check your nerves. So the pregame, one of the things that you'll find with a lot of these programs is that there will typically be a meet and greet event the night before, either hosted by the chief residents or by the program directors, maybe at a chief resident's house or at one of the restaurants that they want to get people to go to. I think this is the best way to get a feel for the program. It's less informal. I would just advise you guys, there's still the magnifying glass on you, so just make sure that you're using common sense. Don't be afraid to ask questions, especially with the residents. I mean, this is kind of, it's kind of unusual because you may not necessarily know who the residents are, but this is the best time to kind of do it because everything on interview day is very formal, and you don't want to be Frank the Tank. So make sure if there's alcohol that's provided, wait till match day to kind of go crazy. It's another thing, when you go into your interviews, obviously you don't want to make it a psych session. So when we get to the actual interview itself, These are pretty straightforward as far as getting plenty of sleep, arriving early, make sure to go to the locations if you can the day before, if you have the luxury to do it. As far as what to actually expect on the interview day itself, generally most programs will have the same format. They'll generally last about half a day. You'll normally get a program introduction, either by the program director, assistant program director, or by the residents, and then they'll be split into two components. You'll have one group that will go into tours, and then the other group that will start with interviews. Generally, the interviews, you'll have about 3 interviews, give or take. And then they'll be concluded with a lunch. So it's pretty straightforward. You definitely want to remember appearances matter. You don't want to be Ben Affleck in Good Will Hunting where you're asking for the retainer right up the bat. Make sure that, and this is kind of what I was talking about a little bit earlier about control what you can control. You would be amazed how many people on their interview days, how many applicants on occasion will arrive just on time, if not late. And that's the worst thing that you want to do, is kind of put yourself right behind the 8 ball. So just make sure you relax, be yourself, and don't assume anything. I think one other thing is that when you're setting up your interviews with the student coordinators, talking with residents, or asking questions even during the program introduction, just realize that it's not just the program director that's making the decision, or the assistant program director. Believe it or not, residents in the program, if they hear something that distresses them, will share that with the program director. So just keep that in mind. Be nice to the program coordinators. They really work very hard to try to schedule it, and it's a little hellish for them. Win with your personality. Obviously when you go on that day, this is easier said than done. When you get your interviews, and you'll remember this, it's easier to be energetic and attentive and focused on your interview number 1 versus your 20th interview, but you really want to be able to win with your personality, and don't lose with attitude. You'd be amazed how many students, believe it or not, who may think that this is a shoo-in because they come in, they think that they've got great board scores, and then they will ask a condescending question even though they may not necessarily mean to. Believe it or not, it's not always just about grades. And so what do you do when you have challenging interviews? I would say, for the most part, most of the interviews are very straightforward. There are going to be some scenarios you're going to feel like this guy right at the edge of the cliff and figuring out, okay, what are they really trying to ask me? For the most part, you're not going to get too many questions that are like that, but if they are, they want to see how well you can kind of think on your feet, how well you can balance under the circumstances. So just take time to answer it as best as you can, and take time to respond. We kind of talked about some of these things already, as far as being enthusiastic, being confident, focusing on what the interviewer is asking. This thing, as far as answering concisely, is pretty key. You want to make sure that you really focus on answering what they're answering the question that they're asking you, not being too divergent on it. And then you also want to watch your body language and look for cues. I'm not going to spend a whole lot. I'm sure Cosmo has multiple articles on body language and everything else. But I think, the main thing is don't be afraid to give a firm handshake, to be confident, to be relaxed, but to use good body language. So what are they going to ask? This is probably the $1 million slide. I guess the main thing is that there's no slide that's going to be able to nail every single one of these questions down. But having gone through it myself and talking with program directors, they vary based on program. But these are some of the common ones. You'll have the all-knowing tell me about yourself, why emergency medicine, what do you know about our program, and how did you choose our program, what are your strengths and weaknesses, what are your career goals, and where do you see yourself in 5 years. We'll kind of go through this as we go through the workshop, but the third question is the one that I want you guys to really focus on, because as you go through, even if it's something where you're traveling en route and you want to know a little bit about that program, do the research the night before. It's going to be impossible to do everything so far in advance, and you're probably going to forget anyway, but just try to do something about it, because it will pay big dividends, especially when they ask you. You don't want to tell them that I'm interested in trauma and find out that you're interviewing at a community program where they may have rotations in trauma, or they may not be a dedicated trauma center. So just keep that in mind. Any hurdles? Avoid disclosing any information about rank order. I think I would be careful. This is probably something that I think not only to the program directors and assistant program directors, but even amongst students, you may enjoy the program very much. You might feel like the program is really your top choice as you're going through it, but I would be very careful about acknowledging and disclosing that, even if that's how you feel. Just be very positive about it, but don't give any specifics. The program directors on the converse should be very keen on not disclosing that either. If you're in that situation where you have to explain bad board scores or grades or any gaps in your CV or other scenarios or any conditions which may impact your ability to work successfully in their program, do it with honesty and show character. I think that's what they're looking for. Everyone's human.
Yeah, I'll echo on the bad board scores. Keep in mind, you've already passed their first test. You're there interviewing. They're interested in you. So, they want an honest answer, and they're not there to grill you.
Exactly. And and Rob talked about it right there, because if you've made the cut to that point, you're right there. So just keep that in mind as you kind of go through. I talk about this. The integrity is everything. I think this is very important because as you kind of go through, EM is a very small community, and as you go through and you're answering some of these questions, they may ask you, where did you interview? And you can kind of go through and perhaps tell them what programs that you've been at. I don't think that would be any violation of sort. But certainly if there's a program that you don't like, you definitely don't want to share that with them and say, this program really sucks and I hate this program director over here, blah, 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 because believe it or not, everybody knows each other. Ask questions. When they ask you if you have any questions, definitely don't say, no, I'm good, because that is not what they're looking for. They want to make sure you can even use the same questions at each interview, because they're not going to keep a tally and say, oh my God, this person used the same questions at every single interview. They're not going to tell you for that. But do it for yourself. What are you looking for in a successful resident? Turn it back onto them. Where do most graduates go? Do they go into academics? Do they go to fellowship? Do they stay in the community? Are the residents happy? You can ask this even on the program the night before, or you can even ask them that. How strong is the prep for the written oral boards? What do they do to help their residents succeed in both? I think this is a good question to ask the program director. This is really, they live and die by the GME as far as making sure that their residents are passing their boards on the first time. And then how does the program view second looks? So these are some questions that you can ask. I mean, certainly the most important thing is to find the questions that really pertain to you. So questions in the ring of fire. This is what I call the ring of fire. You don't want to ask them right on the spot, how would you rank me? Don't put them on the spot there. Avoid any questions about salaries or specifics on scheduling. In fact, as it pertains to salaries, there should be a website that you guys can go through to find out how much each program makes. Avoid any discussion on religion or politics. Avoid asking programs if they've had openings, why an opening arose, and avoid asking for personal contact information unless that's something where maybe you're at the night before that the residents say, here's my email if you have any questions. That's fine. I think that's okay. But I think I would just use that a little cautiously. And then finally, post-game, be courteous to all, both prior and after the interviews. You don't want to rush immediately out after the interview, but you also don't want to linger unnecessarily so that they have to get security to kind of escort you from the room. Get contact information of the interviewers in case you later have a question. Avoid stalking the interviewers. I know we're all type A. We went to med school, we had to get in. As far as you don't want to be the IRS trying to hound them with repeated phone calls or emails. These guys are all very busy. If you have a genuine question, don't feel free. Email is always a good avenue, I find, to try to get in contact with the program directors. If you're looking to do a second look, this is kind of one of those things where I would try to look at this in the right avenue. And what I mean by that is that I think students get creative with trying to do these second looks so that they can get the program director or the assistant program directors to remember you. And although that's not a bad idea, I would take a look at it as, is this going to be something that is going to mean important to me in terms of where I rank them, or if I'm going to rank them at all. So if it's something that it's feasible, that you want to get a good feel for it, but you're not sure because on the actual interview day it's kind of artificial in terms of how happy the residents are, then you might want to do a second look. But don't do it so that you can try to escalate yourself up on the totem pole as far as the rank list goes, because it really is not, your interview itself will dictate what's going to happen. Doing these second looks aren't going to really dictate it. It's really more for you. The thank you emails, notes, and letters. I write this, and this may be controversial, but this is not a must. So a lot of people may think, I need to like get the best calligrapher and have the finest presentation and paper. I mean, it's up to you guys. If you guys really had a good connection with your interviewers and you feel better about doing it, then I would do it that way. And any form of communication is fine. I think it's really up to you, and relax. As far as your goals, you obviously want to. Your main goal is to find yourself, how well of a fit do you see yourself in the program. Second point is important too. Remember that the name or reputation of a program is not everything. Sometimes you may go to a really well-established program, but you may find that the residents are not really some of the residents that you might necessarily click with, or faculty, or vice versa. The goal is to balance your confidence and energy, and you want to make sure to enjoy the interview as best as you possibly can. So what to do after your initial interview, just repeat this up. Be yourself, balance your interviews. A lot of these are going to be scheduled from November through January. Try to make them realistic. You don't want to kill yourself and try to get all of them in before just the middle of December, and kill yourself if you can make it more realistic and spread them out. Try to attend the resident faculty event the night before. Arrive early, be attentive throughout it, relax, and be confident. Remember that emergency medicine is a very small community, very connected. Take time to prepare, even if it means practicing with your spouse, significant other, best friend, classmate, even your dog if you want. Treat each interview as if it was your only interview. And I close this year. I went with my wife to Europe, and one of the places that we went to was Wimbledon. This has always been kind of a lifelong dream for me to go to. And I just put this up because in some ways it's, when you look at this whole process of interviewing, you go through many challenges in life where you try to aspire to get to certain things as far as your goals go. And for me, this has always been something that I've always dreamt of going to. And although there's hurdles in the way, you'll be able to get there. So just stay positive and be yourself. All right. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. One thing I probably would like to add is once you're there, you're on stage from everyone, and so though you feel like the faculty and the program director you need to make a good impression on when you're doing interviews, the reality is the house staff, residents in the program have a significant impact, and each program probably does it differently. Ultimately, you only attend one. For my program, at the end of the interview season, our residency director had a party at his house, had a big board, and literally asked for all the resident input. Like, hey, what do you think about this guy? And sometimes it can be literally only one person that says, man, I really like that guy interviewed. Everyone else like, I don't know, but he's going up to the top, or this head was weird, acted funny on the interview, and said something off. That could be enough to sink you. So, ultimately it comes down to the program director. It was definitely weighted, heavily, the program director's decision and rank list, but it also took into consideration in the house staff rank list as well, and through a group effort. I don't know, how did you guys get involved with yours?
Ours, we had
house staff.
Yeah, so basically what we did was every week we would host one of the residents. We would alternate who was going to host the event. So basically, we'd have all the prospective students come down, and it would just basically be a dinner. So there'd be faculty that would come by, and it was pretty informal, But it was a great way to meet a lot of the prospective candidates. It was definitely more low key. It's always, and you guys will see it. I mean, it's like anything else. You go to a new stage, you don't really know anybody. How easy is it to kind of mingle with other people? I mean, it feels a little bit awkward, but what I would say is that everyone feels the same way. Like as you kind of go through, it's a really nice way to kind of get a feel to see, do these residents really like each other? Do they hate each other? Do they really like it? It's really for you, to kind of see yourself. My God, I'm going to spend 3 or 4 years here at some of these programs, and I want to make sure that I'm happy. So that's something that you need to gauge as you kind of go through. But all I can say is just make an effort to try to get to it. It's uncomfortable for everybody, to be honest. It's hard for the residents as it is for the students that are going through. but we've all been there, and really it's for you guys. And I can tell you, once you're done with residency, everything is so different because then it's catered to you. There's no more competition, none of this. You know, you can slouch, you can do whatever you want, and you'll be okay.
Yeah, he mentioned also, one of the things on there he mentioned about, reputation of programs and whatnot. Ultimately, that's fine, and what gives you confidence and comfort. But I can tell you, in the role of hiring, not only for here, but for the number of other EDs, what's most important to me is that you finish the emergency medicine residency. And it's not weighted as to where it was, to be honest with you. It is such a great job market, certainly in Texas, to be an emergency physician, that pedigree that you have of being, I've completed the EM residency, want to work in the ED is going to set you above, and ultimately, you're in the driver's seat once you're done. And so, if you're looking at it from the perspective of, well, that's going to give me a better job or this or that, it's all going to come down to how you are as a person and where you want to work and where you want to live. You probably have great mobility, ability to do that. And the thing that gets you through more than where you did residency is that you did the residency. Yeah.
And I think the other thing too is that as you kind of go through each interview, just realize you don't have to be bound to the hip and say, oh my God, I have to rank this one number one and this one number one and this one number one. I mean, there are going to be some programs the moment that you kind of step in the door where you may say, I don't know about this one. But, in some ways it is a little bit of an act, like you have to kind of go through it and see how it is. I mean, the whole idea is to try to give yourself as best of a feel as you can. And as far as like when you go into the, later months, when you put your rank list together and go through the match, what I would say is keep a very open mind. I think some people come in with an impact, I really want to stay and go to this program and I want to do everything to focus on that one program. Sometimes the match process is a little funny, and like, believe it or not, like things work in funny ways. And I've understood the general concept, but I still think it's almost like X-Files. It's a mystery as to how it really actually happens. But what I would tell you is that funny things happen sometimes where maybe not necessarily your first choice might end up changing as you kind of go through that process. So keep an open mind. You guys never know, like as you kind of go through, invariably it's kind of like life. You'll go through some of these ones where you'll be like, I didn't think I'd like this program at all. And you'll be in there and you'll be like, wow, I really like the residents. The faculty were really nice. Just keep your, keep an open mind as you kind of go through. But what I would say is, just have fun. Trust me, it's not easy as you kind of get through more and more and more interviews, and especially if you're traveling a lot. Traveling's fun if you're doing it personally, but when you're doing it like this, it's a little bit tougher because you're invariably going to be connecting or getting through delays, and it gets a little bit tougher. So you'll kind of know what I sound like, by your middle of your interviews. You'll be like, okay, just press play, and you know what to say and how to say it, and they could ask you the most ridiculous questions, and you'll be able to know how to answer it. So it does get easier, but just just be yourself, and all I can tell you is at the end of the day, you guys have chosen the right field. I mean, emergency medicine, I cannot talk highly enough about it. It's an amazing field. So you guys are the future for us.